Uh-oh.
Hey.
One time.
Ooh.
Um,
We're lucky. Now we're early.
Now that usually means that the stream will
Well,
crap out during.
as long as we don't crap out, that's fine, right?
Yeah, I hope so, but I mean, judging by the historical standards, there's a good chance it will crap out during stream. So my apologies in advance. I'm so glad I don't have to talk today. Well, not much.
Well, you are talking. Well, hi
Okay.
everyone. Hi Doctor. Hi Phoenicia.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Cats and Coffee, the tales of Beatrix Potter, read by our wonderful cat alien Redundancy. And why do I suddenly
Yeah.
shift into announcer mode?
I don't know, but I guess it's fitting because you're kind of like a radio host.
Oh, okay then, now I feel mocked. Even in this stream!
Yes, you are.
Even in this stream, come on!
Even here, yeah. It must be a thing. Hi, Bramsteinvos.
Hi, brothers and Vos. I mean, come on, this is weird. We already start. This Sunday. Oh yeah!
What's this Sunday?
Oh no, Girius is. Hi Girius and hi Ferals. Girius is doing the announcer voice for several things. This Sunday in the Super Bowl arena. But I don't know.
Yeah.
And immediately, Mermaid Phoenicia comes with the.
How are
How are the kitties doing?
Yeah, I had a toy over here. It might make a sound. So if they get wild, um, sometimes they come and try to destroy my desk, and I hope that the toy that I've thrown around will distract them instead. But it will make weird sounds, so don't be surprised if you start to hear machines or something. They have this mechanical fish. It's I don't know if you've seen the ads, but Elf bought it for her cat, and he didn't like it. He only wants real fish. You know, he's he's a he's a gentleman. He deserves real fish. And he's
No,
like, "What do you think of me? You think I'm a kitten?"
no,
So I'll stop.
he's
Yeah.
too scared actually. Hi furry.
I'm trying to spare his ego.
I don't.
Make him sound like he's mighty and all.
Oh, he can be.
Yeah, mighty scared.
Yeah, he is a scaredy cat.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Els brought it to my place, donated it to the kittens, and they've been tearing that thing apart, and it's been so much fun. Hi, furry. No, it's a mechanical fish toy that you hear, and then you hear the tail, and it makes it like
It's a
that noise.
it's a magic carp without the Pokemon branding.
Yeah, it struggles. Cats love it.
Oh, too bad,
It has-
fellas.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. It's recorded, so if you want to hear it back, then you can, and it's gonna be fun if you make it back for the second. There's a tale today of Tom Kitten. So
Huh.
speaking of kittens, that
Fitting.
would be very, yeah, it would be. But every cat in this house is doing perfectly again. No more medicines, no more special care or whatever. They're all happy and healthy again. And Lara, she is suckling, and Kamea is nursing. So yeah, I don't understand how Kamea falls for this, but they really play this game of one being the mother and the helpless kitten. And she plays it, she goes into the nesting box and she's just waiting there like, oh, I cannot go out. I must wait here for my mom. And Kamea notices it and she just really, really appreciates it somehow. And she's like, oh, look, I have a kitten in my nesting box. I must go and take care of it. Yeah. So, yeah, they really seem to both enjoy this game. And Lara gets to suckle. And she gets warm milk. She can be bribed. That's what we've learned. Highly bribable. Real cat.
Of course, cats are bribable.
Yeah, not all of them. Drake is more like, what do you think of me? I'm almost tall.
Yeah,
Almost.
He has standards, hasn't he?
Yeah. I'm not gonna be in a nesting box. Not me. Someone needs to be the man around this place. He's taking his tasks very seriously. So when his mom and sister are off playing together, he sits with me and he just makes an effort to be as pretty as he can be.
That's really cute, actually.
Yeah. And he wants to help out by cleaning my desk, which means that after he's done cleaning my mouse and my screen by licking it, I have to clean it again because, of course, that's not my idea of it being clean.
But he helps around the house.
He helps around the house. Yeah, he's a very responsible cat and loves to be around. So, yeah, it's fun.
Well then.
Let's see. How is Scratch?
Elsa's already answering.
Yeah. All right. Then, are you ready for the first story?
I'm ready. I mean, it's easy. I just have to mute my microphone and let the chat do its wonders while you read the story. Are you ready?
The first story, I believe, is the story of a fierce, bad rabbit. So, yeah. Let's go for it. Again, a story by Beatrix Potter. Printed in Great Britain. This is a fierce, bad rabbit. Look at his savage whiskers, and his claws, and his turned up tail. This is a nice, gentle rabbit. His mother has given him a carrot. The bad rabbit would like some carrot. He doesn't say please. He takes it. And he scratches the good rabbit very badly. The good rabbit creeps away and hides in a hole. It feels sad. This is a man with a gun. He sees something sitting on a bench. He thinks it's a very funny bird. He comes creeping up behind the trees. And then he shoots. Bang! This is what happens. But this is all he finds on the bench when he rushes up with his gun. The good rabbit peeps out of its hole and sees the bad rabbit tearing past without any tail or whiskers. The end.
What? What?
Most beautiful story ever.
What? Uh,
Okay, you think Phil's made it back yet?
no, I don't think so. Oh, I feel cheated now, actually. I mean, the absolute gall of the story is just like, wow.
Don't take carrots. Leave the carrots alone. Yeah.
Yeah, Girius, that's a rim shot. If the sound thingy is working, but it's okay.
Wow.
Oh, well, if this all gets finished, if all the stories are this quick, it's going to be a quick story time.
Yeah, I really, of all the great stories, this is not my favorite.
A quarter to 10, and that was the Tales of Beatrix Potter.
Yeah, I already wondered, like, did they? This is what you see, you see ears and the tail and apparently whiskers. But what is happening here?
I think Beatrix Potter was a bit tired of the story for a bit, so she figured, let's off someone and see what happens.
Yeah. This is a man with a gun. Bang!
Yeah, I think this is, for me,
I don't feel like drawing a rabbit.
For me personally, this was the most surprising, at least.
Yeah.
Do you need to drink? Do you need to recover from that fierce bout of storytelling?
Whew, let's hydrate. Everybody hydrate.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And there's another story about bad mice. Do you think it would be equally short?
You see the hunter. You see the mice. Bang, 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 bang. No more hunter. No hunter.
You remember what happened to bad rabbits? Well, let me tell you what happens to bad mice.
We need a hydrate button and we need several buttons and things, and I will be looking at improving the stream in my vacation. Because it takes time.
It does.
And effort.
It does. Oh, some mice stealing the cake. Tiny cake. I don't think that's stealing, that's just tempting. This was made for them. It was a setup. These mice need a lawyer. Let's begin. Oh, copyright 1904. That's even earlier than the 1906 that we saw before. Once upon a time, there was a very beautiful doll's house. It was red brick with white windows, and it had a real muslin curtains and a front door and a chimney. It belonged to two dolls called Lucinda and Jane. At least it belonged to Lucinda, but she never ordered meals. Jane was the cook, but she never did any cooking, because the dinner had been bought ready-made in a box full of shavings. There were 2 red lobsters and a ham, a fish, a pudding, and some pears and oranges. They would not come off the plates. but they were extremely beautiful. One morning, Lucinda and Jane had gone out for a drive in the doll's perambulator. There was no one in the nursery, and it was very quiet. Cat toy. Presently, there was a little scuffling, scratching noise in a corner near the fireplace, where there was a hole under the skirting board. Tom Thumb put out his head for a moment, and then popped it in again. Tom Thumb was a mouse. A minute afterwards, Hunca Munca, his wife, put her head out too, and when she saw that there was no one in the nursery, she ventured out on the oilcloth under the coal box. The doll's house stood at the other side of the fireplace. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went cautiously across the hearthrug. They pushed the front door. It was not fast. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went upstairs and peeped into the dining room. And then they squeaked with joy. Such a lovely dinner was laid out upon the table. There were tin spoons and lead knives and forks and 2 dolly chairs, all so convenient. Tom Thumb set to work at once to carve the ham. It was a beautiful shiny yellow, streaked with red. The knife crumpled up and hurt him. He put his finger in his mouth. It's not boiled enough. It is hard. You have a try, Hunca Munca. Hunca Munca stood up in her chair and chopped at the ham with another lead knife. It's as hard as the hams at the cheesemonger's, said Hunca Munca. The ham broke off the plate with a jerk and rolled under the table. Let it alone, said Tom Thumb. Give me some fish, Hunca Munca. Hunca Munca tried every tin spoon in turn. The fish was glued to the dish. Then Tom Thumb lost his temper. He put the ham in the middle of the floor and hit it with the tongs and with the shovel. Bang, bang, smash, smash. The ham flew all into pieces, for underneath the shiny paint, it was made of nothing but plaster. Then there was no end to the rage and disappointment of Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca. They broke up the pudding, the lobsters, the pears, and the oranges. As the fish would not come off the plate, they put it into the red-hot, crinkly paper fire in the kitchen, but it would not burn either. Tom Thumb went up the kitchen chimney and looked out at the top. There was no suit. While Tom Thumb was up the chimney, Hunca Munca had another disappointment. She found some tiny canisters upon the dresser, labeled rice, coffee, sago, but when she turned them upside down, there was nothing inside except red and blue beads. Then those mice set to work to do all the mischief they could, especially Tom Thumb. He took Jane's clothes out of the chest of drawers in her bedroom and he threw them out of the top floor window. But Hunca Munca had a frugal mind. After pulling half the feathers out of Lucinda's bolster, she remembered that she herself was in want of a feather bed. With Tom Thumb's assistance, she carried the bolsters downstairs and across the hearthrug. It was difficult to squeeze the bolster into the mouse hole, but they managed it somehow. Then Hunca Munca went back and fetched a chair, a bookcase, a birdcage, and several small odds and ends. The bookcase and the birdcage refused to go into the mouse hole. Hunca Munca left them behind the coal box and went to fetch a cradle. Hunca Munca was just returning with another chair when suddenly there was a noise of talking outside upon the landing. The mice rushed back to their hole, and the dolls came into the nursery. What a sight met the eyes of Jane and Lucinda. Lucinda sat upon the upset kitchen stove and stared. And Jane leant against the kitchen dresser and smiled. But neither of them made any remark. The bookcase and the birdcage were rescued from under the coal box, but Hunca Munca has got the cradle and some of Lucinda's clothes. She also has some useful pots and pans, and several other things. The little girl that the doll's house belonged to said, "I will get a doll dressed like a policeman." But the nurse said, "I will set a mouse trap." So that is a story of the two bad mice. But they were not so very, very naughty after all, because Tom Thumb paid for everything he broke. He found a crooked sixpence under the hearthrug, and upon Christmas Eve, he and Hunca Munca stuffed it into one of the stockings of Lucinda and Jane. And very early every morning, before anyone is awake, Hunca Munca comes with her dustpan and her broom to sweep the dolly's house. The end.
It's a bit of an anticlimax compared to the previous story, but
Yeah, apparently these ones have remorse.
yeah.
But you don't see it. They just act upon it, but they never pretended to feel bad. You just conclude it.
Mm-hmm. I have to admit that the tales are actually surprising. You don't know what you get with each one.
No, exactly. Some are they just take you with them, and I do think this was a very original take. I think that mice committing crimes against dolls, you don't hear that kind of story often.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wondered, how would dolls fix this? For dolls, mice are just much bigger than for humans or children, or usually the mice are the helpers, but maybe not to dolls. And especially because they were playing with the characteristics of this universe of the dolls, where food is not eaten, there's a fire burning, but there's no soot in the chimney, and such things don't really make sense. So I wondered, is this going to be part of the plot? but most of it is decorations. I do like the naughty mice, and I would have loved if they ended up feeling really badly and wondered like, should we return it? Like, no, I want to keep this. And I would have really thought that would have been fun if they were scheming.
Okay, Doctor went dark all of a sudden.
I think my dolls would respond very differently to this.
No, not that one.
Oh.
They would get angry and torture them.
Yeah, I was not reading that one aloud.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, that would work. It would be very effective.
And Ferris is back.
Hello, ready for the third story, I guess? The first one happened to be very, very short.
Short.
Super short. So, what is attracted by bad mice?
Tom Kitten.
Yeah. It's not some kitten, it's Tom Kitten. I hope this story is a good one.
It will
What
at
is
least
that
be
kittens?
entertaining.
Dedicated to all pickles, especially to those that get upon my garden wall. Pickles. That does she mean the veggie? I don't think so, right? What kind of pickles does she mean?
I don't know, but I think Miss or Mrs. Potter has been hitting the
Pickles. Yeah.
pretty hard. Let's keep it at that.
Okay, this is very promising for this story. So, yeah. Let's go. Once upon a time, there were 3 little kittens, and their names were Mittens, Tom Kitten, and Moppet. They had dear little fur coats of their own, and they tumbled about the doorstep and played in the dust. But one day, their mother, Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, expected friends to tea. So she fetched the kittens indoors to wash and dress them before the fine company arrived. First she scrubbed their faces. This one is Moppet. Then she brushed their fur. This one is Mittens. Then she combed their tails and whiskers. This is Tom Kitten. Tom was very naughty and he scratched. Mrs. Tabitha dressed Moppet and Mittens in clean pinafores and tuckers. And then she took all sorts of elegant, uncomfortable clothes out of a chest of drawers in order to dress up her son, Thomas. Tom Kitten was very fat, and he had grown. Several buttons burst off. His mother sewed them on again. When the 3 kittens were ready, Mrs. Tabitha unwisely turned them out into the garden to be out of the way while she made hot buttered toast. Now keep your frocks clean, children. You must walk on your hind legs. Keep away from the dirty ash pit, and from Sally Henny Penny, and from the pigsty and the puddle duck. Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently, they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. When they stood up, there were several green smears. Let us climb up the rock. Hey, hello!
Raid!
It's a raid! How are you guys? How was the stream?
Welcome to another Cats and
Yes,
Coffee story time.
Yes, I'm reading a cat story and put on my alien cat ears.
We have a follower!
Yes, nice! Mina loves cars. Welcome.
Well,
That
welcome.
is 149 out of 150. Ooh.
No!
Yeah! Oh, goal! Managed 150 followers.
Oh.
Thank you, guys. You're amazing. Thank you very much. Yes, we're Dutch.
But
Cat
why?
raid. Yeah.
Welcome, Raiders. But why?
We all know what's going to happen now, except the new people here. Welcome to everyone who's new. We're Howling Right is a group of 3 people, and today I'm doing a stream with story time. But on Sundays we're also with always with the 3 of us, and Els is an artist and she draws. And Jay is a photographer and a videographer, and he also is our tech guy for the stream. And everybody loves to tease Jay. It just never ends.
Wait,
And so
it says 149 followers right now. Yes, continue. No, no!
All right, fixed it.
Oh, so close!
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the follow. Now I have to wear the insert bad word here till.
Yes. So our goals happen so we can tease Jay with things you have to do. So welcome Yildau and King Marinwen. I hope I say this correctly. This means that Jay has to go and do the thing and make his transformation a little bit more complete.
Yeah, that's a new tail reveal.
It's a new tail reveal with a tail reveal video.
Yes.
Make it pretty. We've been waiting and scheming for this a long time. So yeah, everybody has high expectations now. That they want to see you ashamed.
Yes.
We want to see a tail on that ass. So
it's okay. It's okay. I will make do. I will probably film it in the next couple of weeks and then edit it. So yes.
Details. Oh, curious.
And time to put up the new goal now.
That's also exciting. Too bad that Els isn't there.
She is there. She is commenting actually in the chat a lot.
Well, Els, we're coming for you.
Finally! I mean, I have been... Do you know how much goals I had already?
Well, yeah, you fell for it, so, yeah. Can't help it.
There we go, new goal is up, and I did it wrong.
I don't see it in the... I don't
Nope.
see it yet.
I had to change it. So, this is better.
Yes.
It says
Alright.
200 because at 250 I have to eat a banana.
Mm-hmm. Also, Densetsu, how was your stream? What did you do? So, that's I like that Elf gets to be here at this moment.
Yes. Also, I mean, I think else wouldn't mind a 250 furry, but I'm not eating the banana.
Mm-hmm.
Scary ghouls be scary. It's okay. The pain doesn't exactly go away after a while, but you get used to it for a bit.
Yeah, and Jane knows what it's like. He has felt the same challenge before.
See you later, Densetsu. Thank you for the raid.
Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
That bittersweet feeling.
Bittersweet feeling, yeah, of success. So yeah, you better go your uh, get your plans up for filming this.
We already have the tail in, so that's good. Now we just need the rest of the props.
Mm. All right. We were reading a story about kittens, and their mom had visitors over for tea, so she made all of the three kittens made them very clean and got them to wear this cute Sunday clothing. And then when she was getting ready for the visitors, she allowed the kittens to be outside. And that was a huge mistake. And we're about to see um, how they are going to get dirty and get in trouble. So that's where you guys entered the story. So let us continue. Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently, they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. When they stood up, there were several green smears. "Let us climb up the rockery and sit on the garden wall," said Moppet. They turned their pinafores back to front and went up with a skip and a jump. Moppet's white tucker fell down into the road. Tom Kitten was quite unable to jump when walking upon his hind legs in trousers. He came up the rockery by degrees, breaking the ferns and shredding buttons right and left. He was all in pieces when he reached the top of the wall. Moppet and Mittens tried to pull him together. His hat fell off, and the rest of his buttons burst. While they were in difficulties, there was a pit-pat-paddle. There was a pit-pat-paddle-pat, and the three Puddle Ducks came along the hard high road, marching one behind the other, and doing the goose step. Pit-pat-paddle-pat, pit-pat-paddle-pat, waddle-pat. They stopped and stood in a row, and stared up at the kittens. They had very small eyes and looked surprised. Then the two duck birds, Rebecca and Jemima Puddle Duck, picked up the hat and tucker and put them on. Mittens laughed so hard that he fell off the wall. Moppet and Tom descended after her. The pinafores and the rest of Tom's clothes came off on the way down. "Come, Mr. Drake Puddle Duck," said Moppet. "Come and help us to dress him. Come and button up, Tom." Mr. Drake Puddle Duck advanced in slow sideways manner and picked up the various articles. but he put them on himself. They fitted him even worse than Tom Kitten. "It's a very fine morning," said Mr. Drake Puddle Duck. And he and Jemima and Rebecca Puddle Duck set off up the road, keeping step, pit, pat, paddle, pat, pit, pat, waddle, pat. Then Tabitha Twitchit came down the garden and found her kittens on the wall with no clothes on. Uh-oh. Trouble. She pulled them off the wall, smacked them, and took them back to the house. "My friends will arrive in a minute, and you are not fit to be seen. I am affronted," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. She sent them upstairs. "And I am sorry to say," she told her friends, "that they were in bed with the measles," which was not true. Quite the contrary. They were not in bed, not in the least. Somehow, there were very extraordinary noises overhead, which disturbed the dignity and repose of the tea party. And I think that someday I shall have to make another, larger book to tell you more about Tom Kitten. As for the Puddle Ducks, they went into a pond. The clothes all came off directly, because there were no buttons. And Mr. Drake Puddle Duck and Jemima and Rebecca have been looking for them ever since. Ah, that's why they dive their heads underwater. No, I know. I've always wondered, why do ducks do that? But they're looking for the kitten's clothes. Good one. I like the ending of this one.
Yeah, I expected this to become a gruesome one.
Yeah.
I mean, did she just throw in that the hunter story just so that you will each and every time think like, this is going to happen?
Yeah, someone's gonna die. Yeah. Children books, old children books. I don't know. They're all fine and well, and then suddenly someone gets murdered.
Oh well.
But luckily, not this story.
Fortunately not. And Ferris says applause.
Yay!
Oh, you're getting
Naughtykins.
You're getting the hang of these stories with the
Am
rhythm
I?
and all.
Oh, that's good to hear. I don't really notice myself. I just go for it.
Mm.
What a twist. Yeah, it's a story that starts about cats and it ends up being about ducks. That's also a thing that you don't see a lot anymore. Usually, there's all these Google... yeah, there's articles everywhere about how to write a children's book, and so everybody is following these 5 steps to make a good children's book. So all the children's books are roughly the same. And if you look at the really old ones, and sometimes they're really good, and sometimes you're like...
Well, this one works, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they can be very different, but they don't stick to any kind of rules that you see nowadays. And that's refreshing. What time is it? Let's see.
It's 9:45.
Oh,
Where
we still have plenty of time.
Yeah, 45 minutes.
Yeah. we can still tell the tale of Mrs. Tittlemouse. Again, by Beatrix Potter. Ooh, gonna be a scary story. With big bugs. Once upon a time, there was a wood mouse, and her name was Mr. Tittlemouse. She lived in a bank under the hedge. Such a funny house. There were yards and yards of sandy passages, leading to storerooms and nut cellars and seed cellars, all amongst the roots of the hedge. There was a kitchen, a parlor, a pantry, and a larder. Also, there was Mr. Tillmouse's bedroom, where she slept in a little box bed. Mrs. Tittlemouse was most terribly was a most terribly tidy particular little mouse, always sweeping and dusting the soft sandy floors. Sometimes a beetle lost its way in the passages. Gosh, yeah, little dirty feet, said Mrs. Tittlemouse, clattering her dustpan. And one day, a little old woman ran up and down in a red spotty cloak. Your house is on fire, Mother Ladybird. Fly away home to your children. Another day, a big fat spider came into the shelter from the rain. Beg pardon, is this not Miss Muffet? Go away, you bold bad spider, leaving ends of cobweb all over my nice clean house. He bundled the spider out at the window. He let himself down the hedge with a long, thin bit of string. Mrs. Tittlemouse went on her way to a distant storeroom to fetch cherry stones and thistle down the seat for dinner. All along the passage she sniffed and looked at the floor. I smell a smell of honey. Is it the cowslips outside in the hedge? I am sure I can see the marks of little dirty feet. Suddenly, around a corner, she met Babbity Bumble. Zzz, bzz, bzz, said the bumblebee. Mrs. Tittlemouse looked at her severely. She wished she had a broom. Good day, Babbity Bumble. I should be glad to buy some beeswax. But what are you doing down here? Why do you always come in at a window? Oh, wrong voice. Good day, Babbity Bumble. I should be glad to buy some beeswax. But what are you doing down here? Why do you always come in at a window and say, "Sizz, bizz, bizz"? Mrs. Tittlemouse began to get cross. "Sizz, bizz, bizz," replied Babbity Bumble in a peevish squeak. She settled down a passage and disappeared into a storeroom, which had been used for acorns. Mrs. Tittlemouse had eaten the acorns before Christmas. The storeroom ought to have been empty, but it was full of untidy, dry moss. Mrs. Tittlemouse began to pull out the moss. 3 or 4 other bees put their heads out and buzzed fiercely. I am not in the habit of letting lodgings. This is an intrusion, said Mrs. Tittlemouse. I will have them turned out. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I wonder who would help me. Buzz, whiz, whiz. I will not have Mr. Jackson. He never wipes his feet. Mrs. Tittlemouse decided to leave the bees till after dinner. When she got back to the parlor, she heard someone coughing in a fat voice. And there sat Mr. Jackson himself. He was sitting all over a small rocking chair, twiddling his thumbs and smiling, with his feet on the fender. He lived in a drain below the hedge, in a very dirty, wet ditch. How do you do, Mr. Jackson? Deary me, you've got very wet. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. I'll sit a while and dry myself, said Mr. Jackson. He sat and smiled, and the water dripped off his coat-tails. Mrs. Tittlemouse went round with a mop. He sat such a while that he had to be asked if he would take some dinner. First she offered him cherry stones. Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. No teeth, no teeth, said Mr. Jackson. He opened his mouth most unnecessarily wide. He certainly had not a tooth in his head. Then she offered him thistledown seed. Tiddy widdly widdly, poof poof poof, said Mr. Jackson. He blew the thistledown all over the room. Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. Now what I really, really should like would be a little dish of honey. I am afraid I have not got any, Mr. Jackson, said Mrs. Tittlemouse. Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse, said the smiling Mr. Jackson. I can smell it. That is why I came to call. Mrs. Jackson rose ponderously from the table and began to look into the cupboards. Mrs. Tittlemouse followed him with a dishcloth to wipe his large wet footmarks off the parlor floor. When he had convinced himself that there was no honey in the cupboards, he began to walk down the passage. Indeed, you will stick fast, Mrs. Jackson. Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse. First, he squeezed into the pantry. Tiddy widdly widdly, no honey. No honey, Mrs. Tittlemouse. There were 3 creepy crawly people hiding in the platte rack. One of them got away, but the littlest one he caught. Then he squeezed into the larder. Miss Butterfly was tasting the sugar, but she flew away out of the window. Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse, you seem to have plenty of visitors. And without any invitation, said Mrs. Thomasina Tittlemouse. They went along the sandy passage. Tiddly widdly, buzz whiz whiz. He met Babbity round a corner. and snapped her up and put her down again. I do not like bumblebees. They are all over bristles, said Mr. Jackson, wiping his mouth with his coat sleeve. Get out, you nasty old toad! Shrieked Babbity Bumble. I shall go distracted, scolded Mrs. Tittlemouse. What a scolding. She shut herself up in the nut cellar while Mr. Jackson pulled out the bee's nest. He seemed to have no objection to stings. When Mrs. Tittlemouse ventured to come out, everybody had gone away. But the untidiness was something dreadful. Never did I see such a mess. Smears of honey and moss and thistledown and marks of big and little dirty feet all over my nice clean house. She gathered up the moss and the remains of the beeswax. Then she went out and fetched some twigs to partly close up the front door. I will make it too small for Mr. Jackson. She fetched a soft soap and flannel and a new scrubbing brush from the storeroom, but she was too tired to do any more. First, she fell asleep in her chair, and then she went to bed. Will it ever be tidy again? Said poor Mrs. Tittlemouse. Next morning she got up very early and began a spring cleaning which lasted a fortnight. She swept and scrubbed and dusted, and she rubbed up the furniture with beeswax and polished her little tin spoons. When it was all beautifully neat and clean, she gave a party to 5 other little mice, without Mr. Jackson. He smelt the party and came up the bank, but he could not squeeze in at the door. So they handed him out an acorn cupfuls. So they handed him out acorn cupfuls of honeydew through the window, and he was not at all offended. He sat outside in the sun and said, "Tiddly widdly widdly, your very good health, Mrs. Tittlemouse." The end. Tiddly widdly widdly, this is the end. How do you like it all, tiddly widdly widdly? Was this a fun story, tiddly widdly widdly? I hope it is.
You're stuck in that mode now, aren't you?
Tiddly widdly widdly, what makes you think so? Tiddly widdly widdly. Can you believe it?
I got some Tea Party this and a Bumblebee Transformers reference. I think people actually enjoyed this one. There aren't many comments at this particular point.
That's okay. Everybody just enjoys stories.
So how are you doing? Still up for another few ones?
Definitely.
I think you can manage to do 2. Unless it's the Hunter story again.
Yeah, I think it's gonna... Come on. Gonna be fine. It's going to be just enough for this stream and the next. And then we have to think of something new again.
Girius says,
new book.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I think that frog a lousy bum.
Yeah. I still don't know whether like she cleaned everything because she didn't like visitors, and the first thing she did after she cleaned everything was throw a party.
Maybe she was cleaning for the party?
Let's just say she did. Alright, the next story is The Tale of Timmy Tiptoes. Lots of and this is gonna be lots of the same animals returning. I wonder if there's going to be some names again in this story that we've already heard. Once upon a time, there was a little, fat, comfortable, gray squirrel called Timmy Tiptoes. He had a nest attached with leaves in the top of a tall tree, and he had a little squirrel wife called Goody. Timmy Tiptoes set out, enjoying the breeze. He whisked his tail and chuckled. Little wife Goody, the nuts are ripe. We must lay up a store for winter and spring. Goody Tiptoes was busy pushing moss under the thatch. The nest is so snug, we shall be sound asleep all winter. Then we shall wake up all the thinner when there is nothing to eat in springtime, replied prudent Timothy. When Timmy and Goody Tiptoes came to the nut thicket, they found other squirrels were there already. Timmy took off his jacket and hung it on a twig. They worked away quietly by themselves. Every day they made several journeys and picked quantities of nuts. They carried them away in bags and stored them in several hollow stumps near the tree where they had built their nest. When these stumps were full, they began to empty the bags into a hole high up the tree that had belonged to a woodpecker. The nuts rattled down, down, down inside. How shall you ever get them out again? It's like a money box, said Goody. I shall be much thinner before springtime, my love, said Timmy Tiptoes, peeping into the hole. They did collect quantities, because they did not lose them. Squirrels who bury their nuts in the ground lose more than half, because they cannot remember the place. The most forgetful squirrel in the wood was called Silvertail. He began to dig, and he could not remember. And then he dug again, and found some nuts that did not belong to him. And there was a fight, and other squirrels began to dig. The whole wood was in commotion. Unfortunately, just at this time, a flock of little birds flew by, from bush to bush, searching for green caterpillars and spiders. There were several sorts of little birds, twittering different songs. The first one sang, Who's been digging up my nuts? Who's been digging up my nuts? and another said, "Little bit of bread and no cheese. Little bit of bread and no cheese." The squirrels followed and listened. The first little bird flew into the bush where Timmy and Goody Tiptoes were quietly tying up their bags, and it sang, "Who's been digging up my nuts? Who's been digging up my nuts?" Timmy Tiptoes went on with his work without replying. Indeed, the little bird did not expect an answer. It was only singing its natural song, and it meant nothing at all. But when the other squirrels heard that song, they rushed upon Timmy Tiptoes and cuffed and scratched him and upset his bag of nuts. The innocent little bird which had caused all the mischief flew away in a fright. Timmy rolled over and over and then turned tail and fled towards his nest, followed by a crowd of squirrels shouting, "Who's been digging up my nuts?" They caught him and dragged him up the very same tree where there was the little round hole, and they pushed him in. The hole was much too small for Timmy Tiptoes' figure. They squeezed him dreadfully. It was a wonder they did not break his ribs. "We will leave him there till he confesses," said Silvertail Squirrel, and he shouted into the hole, "Who's been digging up my nuts?" Timmy Tiptoes made no reply. He had tumbled down inside the tree upon half a peck of nuts belonging to himself. He lay quite stunned and still. Goody Tiptoes picked up the nut bags and went home. She made a cup of tea for Timmy, but he didn't come and didn't come. Goody Tiptoes passed a lonely and unhappy night. Next morning she ventured back to the nut bushes to look for him, but the other unkind squirrels drove her away. She wandered all over the wood calling, "Timmy Tiptoes! Timmy Tiptoes! Oh, where's Timmy Tiptoes?" In the meantime, Timmy Tiptoes came to his senses. He found himself tucked up into a little moss bed, very much in the dark, feeling sore. It seemed to be on the ground. Timmy coughed and groaned because his ribs hurt him. There was a chirpy noise, and a small striped chipmunk appeared with a nightlight and hoped that he felt better. This was most kind to Timmy Tiptoes. It lent him his nightcap, and the house was full of provisions. The chipmunk explained that it had rained nuts through the top of the tree. "Besides, I found a few buried." It laughed and chuckled when it heard Timmy's story. While Timmy was confined to bed, it enticed him to eat quantities. "But how shall I ever get through that hole unless I thin myself? My wife will be anxious." "Just another nut, or 2 nuts. Let me crack them for you," said the chipmunk. Timmy Tiptoes grew fatter and fatter. Now Goody Tiptoes had set to work again by herself. She did not put any more nuts into the woodpecker's hole, because she had always doubted how they could be got out. She hid them under a tree foot, They rattled down, down, down. Once, when Goody emptied an extra big bagful, there was a decided squeak, and next time, Goody brought another bagful. A little striped chipmunk scrambled out in a hurry. It is getting perfectly full up downstairs. The sitting room is full, and they are rolling along the passage. And my husband, Chippy Hackey, has run away and left me. What is the explanation of these showers of nuts? I am sure, I beg your pardon. I did not know that anybody lived here, said Mrs. Goody Tiptoes. But where is Chippy Hackey? My husband, Timmy Tiptoes, has run away too. I know where Chippy is. A little bird told me, said Mrs. Chippy Hackey. She led the way to the woodpecker's tree, and they listened at the hole. Down below there was a noise of nutcrackers, and the fat squirrel voice and the thin squirrel voice were singing together. My little old man and I fell out. How shall we bring this matter about? Bring it about as well as you can, and you get your gun, you little old man. You could squeeze in through that little round hole, said Goody Tiptoes. Yes, I could, said the chipmunk. But my husband, Chippy Hackey, bites. Down below there was a noise of cracking nuts and nibbling. And then the fat squirrel voice and the thin squirrel voice sang. Or the diddlum-day, the diddlum-dill, the diddle-dill-dill-dill-diddlum-day. Then Goody peeped in at the hole and called down. Timmy Tiptoes! Oh, fie, Timmy Tiptoes! And Timmy replied, Is that you, Goody Tiptoes? Why, certainly! He came up and kissed Goody through the hole, but he was so fat that he could not get out. Chippy Hackey was not too fat, but he did not want to come home. He stayed down below and chuckled. And so it went on for a fortnight, till a big wind blew off the top of the tree and opened up the hole and let in the rain. Then Timmy Tiptoes came out and went home with an umbrella. But Chippy Hackey continued to camp out for another week, although it was uncomfortable. At last a large bear came walking through the wood. Perhaps he also was looking for nuts. He seemed to be sniffing around. Chippy Hackey went home in a hurry. And when Chippy Hackey got home, he found he had caught a cold in his head, and he was more uncomfortable still. And now Timmy and Goody Tiptoes keep their nut store fastened up with a little padlock. And whenever that little bird sees the chipmunks, he sings, Who's been digging up my nuts? Who's been digging up my nuts? But nobody ever answers. The end. Who's been digging up my nuts?
Yeah, our very own Waldorf and Statler were doing some nut jokes.
Yeah.
Wow, and it
The
was
drawings are very cute.
and
And
it was
it's about,
15 minutes also.
yeah, it was about men never growing up. Like, no, I'm not coming home. We're camping.
Okay, so that's the view of her view of men. Check. Can't say she's
I think
incorrect.
that's, yeah. I just want, guys just want to have fun. It's like the song about girls, but then guys.
Guys, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, All right, last story of today. The tale of Mr. Todd. We have a fox again. So nice. For William Francis of Alva, someday. I wonder why the R is written like that.
Maybe
Mr. Todd.
maybe you should do it like Mr. Todd.
Mr. Oh, different drawing style. Exciting. Let's go. The Tale of Mr. Todd. I have made many books about well-behaved people. Now for a change. I am going to make a story about two disagreeable people called Tommy Brock and Mr. Todd. No one would call Mr. Todd nice. The rabbits could not bear him. They could smell him a half a mile off. He was of a wandering habit and he had foxy whiskers. They never knew where he could be next. One day he was living in a stick house in the coppice, causing terror to the family of old Mr. Benjamin Bouncer. Next day he moved into a pod willow near the lake, frightening the wild ducks and the water rats. In winter and early spring he might generally be found in an earth amongst the rock at the top of Bullbanks, under Oatmeal Crag. He had half a dozen houses, but he was seldom at home. The houses were not always empty when Mr. Todd moved out, because sometimes Tommy Brock moved in without asking leave. Tommy Brock was a short, bristly fat, waddling person with a grin. He grinned all over his face. He was not nice in his habits. He ate wasp nests and frogs and worms, and he waddled about by moonlight, digging things up. His clothes were very dirty, and as he slept in by the daytime, he always went to bed in his boots, and the bed which he went to bed in was generally Mr. Todd's. Now Tommy Brock did occasionally eat rabbit pie, but it was only very little young ones occasionally, when other food was really scarce. He was friendly with old Mr. Bouncer. They agreed in disliking the wicked otters and Mr. Todd. They often talked over that painful subject. Old Mr. Bouncer was stricken in years. He sat in the spring sunshine outside the burrow, in a muffler, smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco. He lived with his son Benjamin Bunny and his daughter-in-law Flopsy, who had a young family. Old Mr. Bouncer was in charge of the family that afternoon because Benjamin and Flopsy had gone out. The little rabbit babies were just old enough to open their blue eyes and kick. They lay in a fluffy bed of rabbit wool and hay, in a shallow burrow, separate from the main rabbit hole. To tell the truth, old Mr. Bouncer had forgotten them. He sat in the sun and conversed cordially with Tommy Brock, who was passing through the wood with a sack and a little spud which he used for digging, and some mole traps. He complained bitterly about the scarcity of pheasant eggs and accused Mr. Todd of poaching them. And the otters had cleared off all the frogs while he was asleep in winter. I have not had a good square meal for a fortnight. I am living on pig nuts. I shall have to turn vegetarian and eat my own tail, said Tommy Brock. It was not much of a joke, but it tickled old Mr. Bouncer, because Tommy Brock was so fat and stumpy and grinning. And so old Bouncer laughed and pressed Tommy Brock to come inside to taste a slide of seed cake and a glass of my daughter Flopsy's cowslip wine. Tommy Brock squeezed himself into the rabbit hole with alacrity. Then old Mr. Bouncer smoked another pipe and gave Tommy Brock a cabbage leaf cigar, which was so very strong that it made Tommy Brock grin more than ever, and the smoke filled the burrow. Old Mr. Bouncer coughed and laughed, and Tommy Brock puffed and grinned, and Mr. Bouncer laughed and coughed and shut his eyes because of the cabbage smoke. When Flopsy and Benjamin came back, old Mr. Bouncer woke up. Tommy Brock and all the young rabbit babies had disappeared. Mr. Bouncer would not confess that he had admitted anyone into the rabbit hole, but the smell of badger was undeniable, and there were round, heavy footmarks in the sand. He was in disgrace. Flopsy wrung her ears and slapped him. Benjamin Bunny set off at once after Tommy Brock. There was not much difficulty in tracking him. He had left his footmark and gone slowly up the winding footpath through the wood. There he had rooted up the moss and wood sorrel. There he had dug quite a deep hole for dog darnel and had set up a mole trap. A little stream crossed the way. Benjamin skipped lightly over dry foot, and the badger's heavy steps showed plainly in the mud. The path led to a part of the thicket where the trees had been cleared. There were leafy old stumps and a sea of blue hyacinths, but the smell that made Benjamin stop was not the smell of flowers. Mr. Todd's stick house was before him, and for once Mr. Todd was at home. There was not only a foxy flavor in the proof of it, there was smoke coming out of the broken pail that served as a chimney. Benjamin Bunny sat up, staring. His whiskers twitched. Inside the stick house, somebody dropped a plate and said something. Benjamin stamped his foot and bolted. He never stopped till he came to the other side of the wood. Apparently, Tommy Brock had turned the same way. Upon the top of the wall there were again the marks of badger, and some ravelings of a sack had caught on a briar. Benjamin climbed over the wall into a meadow. He found another mole trap newly set. He was still upon the track of Tommy Brock. It was getting late in the afternoon. Other rabbits were coming out to enjoy the evening air. One of them, in a blue coat, by himself, was busily hunting for dandelions. "Cousin Peter! Peter Rabbit! Peter Rabbit!" shouted Benjamin Bunny. The blue-coated rabbit sat up with pricked ears. "Whatever is the matter, Cousin Benjamin? Is it a cat? Or John Stoat Ferret?" "No, no, no! He's back, my family! Tommy Brock, in a sack! Have you seen him?" "Tommy Brock? How many, Cousin Benjamin?" "7, Cousin Peter, all of them twins. Did he come this way? Please, tell me quick." Yes, yes, not 10 minutes since," he said. "He said they were caterpillars. I did think they were kicking rather hard for caterpillars." Which way has he gone, Cousin Peter?" He had a sack with something live in it. I watched him set a mole trap. Let me use my mind. Cousin Benjamin, tell me from the beginning." Benjamin did so. "My Uncle Bouncer has displayed a lamentable want of discretion for his years," said Peter reflectively. "But there are 2 hopeful circumstances. Your family is alive and kicking, and Tommy Brock has had refreshments. He will probably go to sleep and keep them for breakfast." "Which way?" "Cousin Benjamin, compose yourself. I know very well which way. Because Mr. Todd was at home in the stick house, he has gone to Mr. Todd's other house, at the top of Bullbanks. I partly know because he offered to leave any message at Sister Cottontail's. He said he would be passing." Cottontail had married a black rabbit and gone to live on the hill. Peter hid his dandelions and accompanied the afflicted parent, who was all of a twitter. They crossed several fields and began to climb the hill. The tracks of Tommy Brock were plainly to be seen. He seemed to have put down the sack several dozen yards to rest. "He must be very puffed. We are close behind him, by the scent. What a nasty person," said Peter. The sunshine was still warm and slanting on the hill pastures. Halfway up, Cottontail was sitting in her doorway with 4 or 5 half-grown little rabbits playing about her, one black and the others brown. Cottontail had seen Tommy Brock passing in the distance. Asked whether her husband was at home, she replied that Tommy Brock had rested twice while she watched him. He had nodded and pointed to the sack and seemed doubled up with laughing. "Come away, Peter, he will be cooking them. Come quicker," said Benjamin Bunny. They climbed up and up. "He was at home. I saw his black ears peeping out the hole. They live too near the rocks to quarrel with their neighbors. Come on, Cousin Benjamin." When they came near the wood at the top of Bullbanks, they went cautiously. The trees grew amongst heaped up rocks, and there, beneath a crag, Mr. Todd had made one of his homes. It was at the top of a steep bank. The rocks and bushes overhung it. The rabbits crept up carefully, listening and peeping. This house was something between a cave, a prison, and a tumble-down pigsty. There was a strong door, which was shut and locked. The setting sun made the window panes glow like a red flame. But the kitchen fire was not alight. It was neatly laid with dry sticks. As the rabbits could see, when they peeped through the window. Benjamin sighed with relief. But there were preparations upon the kitchen table which made him shudder. There was an immense empty pie dish of blue willow pattern, and a large carving knife and a fork and a chopper. At the other end of the table was a partly unfolded tablecloth, a plate, a tumbler, a knife and fork, salt cellar, mustard, and a chair. In short, preparations for one person's supper. No person was to be seen, and no young rabbits. The kitchen was empty and silent. The clock had run down. Peter and Benjamin fluttered their noses against the window and stared into the dusk. When they scrambled round the rocks to the other side of the house, it was damp and smelly and overgrown with thorns and briars. The rabbits shivered in their shoes. "Oh, my poor rabbit babies! What a dreadful place! I shall never see them again," sighed Benjamin. They crept up the bedroom window. It was closed and bolted like the kitchen. But there were signs that this window had been recently opened. The cobwebs were disturbed, and there were fresh, dirty footmarks upon the window sill. The room inside was so dark that at first they could make out nothing, but they could hear a noise. A slow, deep, regular, snoring grunt. And as their eyes became accustomed to the darkness, they perceived that somebody was asleep on Mr. Tod's bed, curled up under the blanket. "He has gone to bed in his boots," whispered Peter. Benjamin, who was all of a twitter, pulled Peter off the window sill. Tommy Brock's snores continued, grunty and regular from Mr. Tod's bed. Nothing could be seen of the young family. The sun had set. The owl began to hoot in the wood. There were many unpleasant things lying about that had much better have been buried. Rabbit bones and skulls, and chicken legs and other horrors. It was a shocking place, and very dark. They went back to the front of the house and tried in every way to move the bolt of the kitchen window. They tried to push up a rusty nail between the window sashes, but it was of no use, especially without a light. They sat side by side outside the window, whispering and listening. In half an hour the moon rose over the wood. It shone full and clear and cold upon the house, amongst the rocks, and in at the kitchen window. But alas, no little rabbit babies were to be seen. The moonbeams twinkled on the carving knife and the pie dish, and made a path of brightness across the dirty floor. The light showed a little door in a wall beside the kitchen fireplace. A little iron door belonging to a brick oven of that old-fashioned sort of that used to be heated with faggots of wood. And presently, at the same moment, Peter and Benjamin noticed that whenever they shook the window, the little door opposite shook in answer. The young family were still alive, shut up in the oven. Benjamin was so excited that it was a mercy he did not awake Tommy Brock, whose snores continued solemnly in Mr. Tod's bed. But there really was not very much comfort in the discovery. They could not open the window, and although the young family was alive, the little rabbits were quite incapable of letting themselves out. They were not old enough to crawl. After much whispering, Peter and Benjamin decided to dig a tunnel. They began to burrow a yard or two lower down the bank. They hoped that they might be able to work between the large stones under the house. The kitchen floor was so dirty that it was impossible to say whether it was made of earth or flags. They dug and dug for hours. They could not tunnel straight on account of stones, but by the end of the night they were under the kitchen floor. Benjamin was on his back, scratching upwards. Peter's claws were worn down. He was outside the tunnel, shuffling sand away. He called out that it was morning, sunrise, and that the jays were making a noise down below in the woods. Benjamin Bunny came out of the dark tunnel, shaking the sand from his ears. He cleaned his face with his paws. Every minute the sun shone warmer on the top of the hill. In the valley there was a sea of white mist, with golden tops of trees showing through. Again, from the fields down below in the mist, there came the angry cry of a jay, followed by the sharp yelping bark of a fox. Then those two rabbits lost their heads completely. They did the most foolish thing that they could have done. They rushed into their short new tunnel and hid themselves at the top end of it, under Mr. Todd's kitchen floor. Mr. Todd was coming up Bullbanks, and he was in the very worst of tempers. First, he had been upset by breaking the plate. It was his own fault, but it was a china plate, the last of the dinner service that had belonged to his grandmother, Old Vixen Todd. Then the midges had been very bad. He had failed to catch a hen pheasant on her nest, and it had contained only 5 eggs, 2 of them addled. Mr. Todd had an unsatisfactory night. As usual, when out of humor, he determined to move house. First, he tried the pollard willow, but it was damp, and the others had left a dead fish near it. Mr. Todd likes nobody's leavings but his own. He made his way up the hill. His temper was not improved by noticing unmistakable marks of badger. No one else grubs up the moss so wantonly as Tommy Brock. Mr. Todd slapped his stick upon the earth and fumed. He guessed where Tommy Brock had gone to. He was further annoyed by the jaybird, who followed him persistently. It flew from tree to tree and scolded, warning every rabbit within hearing that either a cat or a fox was coming up the plantation. Once, when it flew screaming over his head, Mr. Todd snapped at it and barked. He approached his house very carefully. With a large rusty key, he sniffed and his whisker bristled. The house was locked up. But Mr. Todd had his doubts whether it was empty. He turned the rusty key in the lock. The rabbits below could hear it. Mr. Todd opened the door cautiously and went in. The sight that Mr. Todd's eyes in Mr. Todd's kitchen made Mr. Todd. The sight that met Mr. Todd's eyes in Mr. Todd's kitchen made Mr. Todd furious. There was Mr. Todd's chair and Mr. Todd's pie dish and his knife and fork and mustard and salt cellar and his tablecloth that he had left folded up in the dresser, all set out for supper or breakfast, without doubt for that odious Tommy Brock. There was a smell of fresh earth and dirty badger, which fortunately overpowered all the smell of rabbit. But what absorbed Mr. Todd's attention was a noise. A deep, slow, regular, snoring, grunting noise coming from his own bed. He peeped through the hinges of the half-open bedroom door. Then he turned and came out of the house in a hurry. His whiskers bristled and his coat collar stood on end with rage. For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Todd kept creeping cautiously into the house and retreating hurriedly out again. By degrees, he ventured further in, right into the bedroom. When he was outside the house, he scratched up the earth with fury, but when he was inside, he did not like the look of Tommy Brock's teeth. He was lying on his back, with his mouth open, grinning from ear to ear. He snored peacefully and regularly, but one eye was not perfectly shut. Mr. Todd came in and out of the bedroom. Twice he brought in his walking stick, and once he brought in the coal scuttle, but he thought better of it and took them away. When he came back after removing the coal scuttle, Tommy Brock was lying a little more sideways, but he seemed even sounder asleep. He was an incurably indolent person. He was not in the least afraid of Mr. Todd. He was simply too lazy and comfortable to move. Mr. Todd came back yet again into the bedroom with a clothesline. He stood a minute watching Tommy Brock and listening attentively to the snores. They were very loud indeed, but seemed quite natural. Mr. Todd turned his back towards the bed and undid the window. It creaked. He turned round with a jump. Tommy Brock, who had opened one eye, shut it hastily. The snores continued. Mr. Todd's proceedings were peculiar and rather difficult, because the bed was between the window and the door of the bedroom. He opened all the window a little way and pushed out the greater part of the clothesline onto the windowsill. The rest of the line, with a hook at the end, remained in his hand. Tommy Brock snored conscientiously. Mr. Todd stood and looked at him for a minute. Then he left the room again. Tommy Brock opened both eyes and looked at a rope and grinned. There was a noise outside the window. Tommy Brock shut his eyes in a hurry. Mr. Todd had gone out at the front door and round the back of the house. On the way, he stumbled over the rabbit burrow. If he had had any idea who was inside, he would have pulled them out quickly. His foot went through the tunnel, nearly upon the top of Peter Rabbit and Benjamin, but fortunately, he thought that it was some more of Tommy Brock's work. He took up the coil of line from the sill, listened for a moment, and then tied the rope to a tree. Tommy Brock watched him with one eye through the window. He was puzzled. Mr. Todd fetched a large, heavy pailful of water from the spring and staggered it with it through the kitchen into his bedroom. Tommy Brock snored industriously, with rather a snort. Mr. Todd put down the pail beside the bed, took up the end of the rope with the hook, hesitated, and looked at Tommy Brock. The snores were almost apoplectic, but the grin was not quite so big. Mr. Todd gingerly mounted a chair by the head of the bedstead. His legs were dangerously near to Tommy Brock's teeth. He reached up and put the end of the rope with the hook over the head of the tester bed, where the curtains ought to hang. Mr. Tod's curtains were folded up and put away, owing to the house being unoccupied. So was the counterpane. Tommy Brock was covered with a blanket only. Mr. Tod, standing on the unsteady chair, looked down upon him attentively. He really was a first-prize, sound sleeper. It seemed as though nothing would waken him, not even the flapping rope across the bed. Mr. Tod descended safely from the chair and endeavored to get up again with the pail of water. He intended to hang it from the hook, dangling over the head of Tommy Brock, in order to make a sort of shower bath, worked by a string through the window. But naturally, being a thin-legged person, though vindictive and sandy-whiskered, he was quite unable to lift the heavy weight out to the level of the hook and rope. He very nearly overbalanced himself. The snores became more and more apoplectic. One of Tommy Brock's hind legs twitched under the blanket, but still he slept on peacefully. Mr. Tod and the pail descended from the chair without accident. After considerable thought, he emptied the water into a wash basin and jug. The empty pail was not too heavy for him. He slung it up, wobbling over the head of Tommy Brock. Surely there never was such a sleeper. Mr. Tod got up and down and up on the chair. As he could not lift the whole pailful of water at once, he fetched a milk jug and ladled quarts of water into the pail by degrees. The pail got fuller and fuller and swung like a pendulum. Occasionally, a drop splashed over, but still, Tommy Brock snored regularly and never moved, except in one eye. At last, Mr. Tod's preparations were complete. The pail was full of water, the rope was tightly strained over the top of the bed and across the windowsill to the tree outside. It will make a great mess in my bedroom, but I could never sleep in that bed again without a spring cleaning of some sort, said Mr. Tod. Mr. Tod took a last look at the badger and softly left the room. He went out of the house, shutting the front door. The rabbits heard his footsteps over the tunnel. He ran round behind the house, intending to undo the rope in order to let fall the pailful of water upon Tommy Brock. It will wake him up with an unpleasant surprise, said Mr. Tod. The moment he had gone, Tommy Brock got up in a hurry. He rolled Mr. Tod's dressing gown into a bundle, put it into the bed beneath the pail of water instead of himself, and left the room also, grinning immensely. He went into the kitchen, lighted the fire, and boiled the kettle. For the moment, he did not trouble himself to cook the baby rabbits. When Mr. Tod got to the tree, he found that the weight and strain had dragged the knot so tight that it was past untying. He was obliged to gnaw it with his teeth. He chewed and gnawed it for more than 20 minutes. At last the rope gave way with a sudden jerk that it nearly pulled his teeth out and quite knocked him over backwards. Inside the house there was a great crash and splash, and the noise of a pail rolling over and over, but no screams. Mr. Tod was mystified. He sat quite still and listened attentively. Then he peeped in at the window. The water was dripping from the bed. The pail had rolled into a corner. In the middle of the bed, under the blanket, was a wet something. much flattened in the middle, where the pail had caught it, as if it were across the tummy. Its head was covered by the wet blanket, and it was not snoring any longer. There was nothing stirring, and no sound except the drip, drop, drop, drip of water trickling from the mattress. Mr. Todd watched it for half an hour. His eyes glistened. Then he cut the caper and became so bold that he even tapped at the window, but the bundle never moved. Yes, there was no doubt about it. It had turned out even better than he had planned. The pail hit poor old Tommy Brock and killed him dead. I will bury that nasty person in the hole which he has dug. I will bring my bedding out and dry it in the sun, said Mr. Todd. I will wash the tablecloth and spread it on the grass in the sun to bleach, and the blanket must be hung up in the wind, and the bed must be thoroughly disinfected, and aired with a warming pan, and warmed with a hot water bottle. I will get soft soap and monkey soap and all sorts of soap, and soda and scrubbing brushes, and the Persian powder and carbolic to remove the smell. I must have a disinfecting. Perhaps I may have to burn sulfur. He hurried round the house to get a shovel from the kitchen. First I will arrange the hole, then I will drag out that person in the blanket. He opened the door. Tommy Brock was sitting at Mr. Todd's kitchen table, pouring out tea from Mr. Todd's teapot into Mr. Todd's teacup. He was quite dry himself and grinning, and he threw the cup of scalding tea all over Mr. Todd. Then Mr. Todd rushed upon Tommy Brock, and Tommy Brock grappled with Mr. Todd amongst the broken crockery, and there was a terrific battle all over the kitchen. To the rabbits underneath, it sounded as if the floor would give way at each crash of falling furniture. They crept out of their tunnel and hung about amongst the rocks and bushes, listening anxiously. Inside the house the racket was fearful. The rabbit babies in the oven woke up trembling. Perhaps it was fortunate they were shut up inside. Everything was upset except the kitchen table, and everything was broken except the mantelpiece and the kitchen fender. The crockery was smashed into atoms. The chairs were broken, and the window and the clock fell with a crash, and there were handfuls of Mr. Todd's sandy whiskers. The vases fell off the mantelpiece, the canisters fell off the shelf, the kettle fell off the hob. Tommy Brock put his foot in a jar of raspberry jam, and the boiling water out of the kettle fell upon the tail of Mr. Todd. When the kettle fell, Tommy Brock, who was still grinning, happened to be the uppermost, and he rolled Mr. Todd over and over like a log out the door. Then the snarling and worrying went on outside, and they rolled over the bank and downhill, bumping over the rocks. There will never be any love lost between Tommy Brock and Mr. Todd. As soon as the coast was clear, Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny came out of the bushes. Now for it! Run in, Cousin Benjamin! Run in and get them, while I watch the door! But Benjamin was frightened. Uh-oh, they are coming back! No, they are not! Yes, they are! What a dreadful bad language! I think they have fallen down the stone's quarry. Still Benjamin hesitated, and Peter kept pushing him. Be quick, it's all right. Shut the oven door, Cousin Benjamin, so that he won't miss them. Decidedly, there were lively doings in Mr. Todd's kitchen. At home in the rabbit hole, things had not been quite comfortable. After quarreling at supper, Flopsy and old Mr. Bouncer had passed a sleepless night and quarreled again at breakfast. Old Mr. Bouncer could no longer deny that he had invited company into the rabbit hole, but he refused to reply to the questions and reproaches of Flopsy. The day passed heavily. Old Mr. Bouncer, very sulky, was huddled up in a corner, barricaded with a chair. Flopsy had taken away his pipe and hidden his tobacco. She had been having a complete turnout and spring cleaning to relieve her feelings. She had just finished. Old Mr. Bouncer, behind his chair, was wondering anxiously what she would do next. In Mr. Todd's kitchen, amidst the wreckage, Benjamin Bunny picked his way to the oven nervously through a thick cloud of dust. He opened the oven door, felt inside, and found something warm and wriggling. He lifted it out carefully and rejoined Peter Rabbit. "I've got them! Can we get away?" "Shall we hide, Cousin Peter?" Peter pricked his ears. Distant sounds of fighting still echoed in the wood. 5 minutes afterwards, 2 breathless rabbits came scuttering away down Bullbanks, half carrying, half dragging a sack between them. Bumpety bump over the grass. They reached home safely and burst into the rabbit hole. Great was old Mr. Bouncer's relief and Flopsy's joy when Peter and Benjamin arrived in triumph with the young family. The rabbit babies were rather tumbled and very hungry. They were fed and put to bed. They soon recovered. A new long pipe and a fresh supply of rabbit tobacco was presented to Mr. Bouncer. He was rather upon his dignity, but he accepted. Old Mr. Bouncer was forgiven, and they all had dinner. Then Peter and Benjamin told their story, but they had not waited long enough to be able to tell the end of the battle between Tommy Brock and Mr. Todd. The end.
Well then, guess you gave the stream a bit of a treat. That was about half an hour extra.
Yeah, it just didn't stop. Of all the short stories, then suddenly there was a long one.
Yes, but well done.
It's a treat. I'm not gonna stop halfway.
No, that's why we figured might as well go.
Yeah.
Furry is already gone because he had to go to sleep. There were a
Yeah.
couple of jokes about Els waking up me that way.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, that
Yeah.
got turned around as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this one's pretty good. A lot of action for.
I liked the sounds of the jay and the fox in one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like the story.
And I think that was the last of the Peter Rabbit books, right?
No, not at
Oh
all.
wow, still have some left.
Let's see.
Not that we're
Wait.
going to do that today, but
No, not today. Let's see. I lost my window. Here it is. We still have the tale of Pigling Bland, the Rolly-Polly pudding, the pie and the patty pan, Ginger and Pickles, and the story of Miss Moppet. And then we have Apply Dapply nursery rhymes, Cecily Parsley nursery rhymes, and the tale of Lil Pig Robinson. And that will be the end.
in that case, we'll probably do that next week.
Yes,
See
we
if
will.
You're doing story time twice.
I am. So yeah, this was one, and now it's after the bedtime stories. I guess it is time for bed for all of us.
As usual, thank you very much, Nancy, for doing the awesome reading again.
Thank you for you, Jay, for your help, and to everyone in chat. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for being here.
Yes, see you later. Next Sunday will be a regular stream, Foxes and Coffee, where we are doing another doodle time, of course, and lots of other talky stuff.
Talkie.
See you
Walkie-talkie.
later. No, not the
Hey,
walkie-talkie.
bye-bye,
I'm
good night.
sitting down.
Okay.
See you later,
Sitty-talkie.
everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.